Ladies and gentlemen, if you could move to your seats, we've got a fairly militaristic timetable today, so we'd like to kick off. If there are spare seats beside you, don't be perturbed. There's some people stuck with fog in Canberra, but the Secretary of the Treasury is at the airport, so hopefully the flights will eventually get him here by lunchtime. I'm now going to pass to, my name's John Kunkel, Senior Economics Advisor at the US Study Centre. I'll pass to the CEO, Mike Green, to kick us off.
Good morning. It's great to see everyone, and I want to thank John Kunkel, who is the mastermind of our gathering and brought to it his policy and economics expertise and helped us pull together this impressive group of business leaders, officials, scholars, to unpack the issue for today, economic security in a turbulent world. I want to begin by paying my respects to the Gadigal people, the traditional owners of this land, and give respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I want to thank our international guests, some of whom arrived this morning, some yesterday. It's a long haul from North America and Europe, I know. I've done it. Many of you have. As John said, we have a crew coming from Canberra from about 5 or 6 different government departments, weather permitting. And I also want to give a thanks to our keynote speakers and senior government representatives from the US, Japan, Korea, the United Kingdom, New Zealand, who've joined us, and distinguished members of the diplomatic corps who are with us today. 3 brief housekeeping announcements. Safety. In the event of an emergency, please follow the directions of the hotel security staff, who will be right outside that way. The bathrooms, you go out that way, turn right as you leave, and they're down the corridor. And we have a pretty tight schedule today. We're packing in a lot, and tomorrow. We'll be doing everything we can to move it forward. When our staff says it's time to resume, please come back in the room. You can bring your flat whites with you, but we have a lot of interesting topics to get to. This conference has its genesis in an inescapable reality that geopolitical tensions and a more contested international order are reshaping the contours of the global economy. And this is not a cyclical thing. It's not like inflation. This is an intergenerational feature of the business and government environment that we and our children likely will be contending with. Geopolitical risk is igniting the search for economic security, the name of this conference. Economic relations are being rewired in the wake of intensified strategic competition here in the Indo-Pacific, but also with war in Europe and growing conflict in the Middle East. There are new security partnerships being forged, like the Quad and AUKUS. Connections between revisionist powers are stronger than they have been in decades. As we meet today, Vladimir Putin is in Pyongyang meeting with his new best friend, Kim Jong-un. Economic policy frameworks geared to a world of deep globalization are being transformed. Countries are looking to de-risk areas of economic vulnerability, secure competitive advantage, rebuild industrial capacity in many cases, secure advanced technologies necessary not only for economic competition, but the future of success on the battlefield. Economic orthodoxies are under challenge. Some call it a poly-crisis, some call it a perma-crisis. The IMF describes it as a more shock-prone world, and yet, U.S. trade with China, for example, is still larger than the trade of Japan, Korea, and Australia with China combined. The average U.S. tariff rate last year was half of Korea's or the EU's. So, plus que change, plus que la même chose, there are elements of global interaction that continue. There are elements of shocking and unpredictable fragmentation and uncertainty. The Washington consensus is under assault, partly from Washington. And not everyone agrees what government intervention should be. And different countries, and of course different firms, view this differently. I sometimes compare it to the Japanese fable Rashomon, or the story of the blind man and the elephant. You know, depending on where you're touching the elephant, you see a snake or a bull. If you're in Japan or Korea, you're heavily focused on semiconductors and high tech. If you're in Australia, maybe you're more focused on dealing with economic embargoes, supply chains, and critical minerals. If you're in Europe, maybe you're doing all of the above. And so we have an opportunity here today to hear from stakeholders across the private sector, across the Australian government, but also across government and industry leaders in some of America and Australia's closest partners, Japan, Korea, the EU, Korea, Singapore, so forth. And this is very much consistent with the theory of impact of our center, the U.S. Studies Center. We do a lot of work on the United States. We have 2,000 students at the University of Sydney taking courses. When we're not doing economic security or constitutional law, we're also teaching courses on the history of rock and roll and stand-up comedy. That conference is later if you're interested. I'm not joking. So our theory of impact is very much based on looking at problems that are difficult in an era where problems are becoming more horizontal and disrespecting the vertical, sort of cylindrical structure of government institutions, alliances, international relations. It's a good chance for a think tank to convene like we are today, start looking for where that Venn diagram overlaps among stakeholders confronting a new challenge in a new era. And we are particularly happy with the business turnout today. I want to thank our major partners for the conference, the Minerals Council of Australia, Microsoft, and the Asia Natural Gas and Energy Association. We're delighted that the Financial Times is our media partner. We'll hear from Alan Beattie from the Financial Times shortly. And that will be our first panel. We will meet up here to hear from Alan and Emily. Well, I'll introduce them later, but from a group of leading thinkers on economic security. But before we do that, we're going to hear some opening addresses. Alan will come next, but I'm now happy to introduce a video message and remarks to us from the Secretary of Commerce in the United States, Gina Raimondo. Gina Raimondo is, without question, the most powerful Commerce Secretary in the modern era. I've written a history of U.S. International engagement with Asia, and I think she's probably the most powerful Commerce Secretary in 100 years or more. The last really powerful Commerce Secretary in the U.S. was actually Herbert Hoover, who is not remembered as a great president, but was an incredibly effective Commerce Secretary. And Gina Raimondo is of an even higher caliber in the way she's reshaping the department and its policy and thought leadership in the U.S. and around the world. We're going to hear from Secretary Raimondo, and then we'll turn it over to Alan, and then our panel. So let us now turn, we don't have to applaud, I suppose, she's not here, but let's now turn it over to Secretary Raimondo.
Hi, everyone. Thank you to the U.S. Studies Center for inviting me to join you. This conference comes at a pivotal moment. As national security becomes increasingly reliant upon advanced technology, economic security matters more than ever. And that's what's driving our work in the Biden administration and here at the Department of Commerce. Economic security is central to the strong and enduring relationship between the U.S. and Australia, which is underpinned by the U.S.-Australia FTA and AUKUS, and complemented by our cooperation under the new Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or IPEF. Strengthening our economic relationships with the Indo-Pacific region is crucial to our global future. Under IPEF, which collectively represents 40% of global GDP, 14 partner countries have worked together to build a shared vision for long-term economic cooperation. And in barely 2 years, we've transformed IPEF from an idea to 3 groundbreaking, first-of-their-kind government-to-government agreements that offer the prospect of strengthening supply chains, supporting clean economy transitions, and enhancing transparent and predictable business environments. I was so pleased to join Minister Farrell and the other IPEF ministers in Singapore last week, where we signed the Clean Economy and Fair Economy Agreements and held the inaugural IPEF Clean Economy Investor Forum. We also negotiated a 4th overarching agreement that will formalize this group we've created together and provide high-level guidance for our work under IPEF. The U.S. shares Australia's concern about the increasing use of economic coercion to attempt to influence other governments' sovereign decisions and policies. During my dialogue with Minister Farrell in Singapore, we committed to working together to strengthen cooperation on economic security, including when facing trade-distorting subsidies, unfair trade practices, and unfair competition. That's why I'm encouraged by our two nations' joint work on critical mineral supply chains. I was pleased to join Prime Minister Albanese and Resource Minister King for Critical Minerals Business Roundtable in D.C. last year. Together, we're turning our respect for the environment, our market transparency, and our cultures of innovation into an enduring advantage against our strategic competitors in the critical minerals sector. The U.S.-Australia commercial relationship is a model for how countries with similar values can see investment and employment grow in ways that benefit their economies, their national security, and their private sectors, workers, and communities. I'm eager to see all that we can accomplish together and wish you a successful conference. Thank you.
For those who want to ask Secretary Raimondo questions, she's obviously not here. However, her previous principal advisor on China and the Indo-Pacific, Liz Economy, is, so you can ask her question. And Liz will now report back to the Secretary that there was a standing ovation at this point. So thank you.